to recreational and 20% to commercial for fisheries below Priest Rapids. Sockeye was about 80% for Snake River ESA impacts to the rec, and the balance to commercial for indirect chinook harvest fisheries. And the fall chinook for the Lower River hatchery and Snake River wild bright sharing was no more than 70% of allowed ESA to most constrained stock to rec, and no less than 30% to commercial. Additionally, we also have the WDFW Colville Tribal Management Agreement that speaks to the Upper Columbia summer chinook sharing. So that was a quick high level there. So moving on to the 2020 non-treaty fishery review. Again, I'm going to keep this really short, but due to a low forecast for summer chinook, fisheries were not planned pre-season, but were open in season starting July 4th for summer chinook. And sockeye fisheries had a higher catch than expected. And so the sockeye fishery was closed once we were approaching our allowed Snake River impacts. Both sockeye and summer chinook came in, as I've mentioned before, above forecast, which provided those fishing opportunities. Again, the rest of page 2 covers summer chinook estimates and our postseason model. But if you kind of sum it up, the non-treaty used up about 61% of their allowed summer chinook take, given the run size that returned. So then kind of the bottom of page 3 starts off on the fall fisheries for buoy 10 and continues on. Not going to walk through this, it's more for your reference again, but we had a split season approach, if you remember, which we were planning fisheries to target 8.25% prior to the run update, which is mid-September. And then once the run was confirmed, provided reopening. The preseason plan was September 23rd, but actually for Chinook, but we were able to update the run a little quicker and confident that we had additional fish to work with. So fisheries actually had more Chinook days open than planned preseason. They started prior to September 23rd throughout the Lower River and Zone 6 sport fisheries as well. So again, I'm not going to walk through the details on these fisheries, but on page 5 is where the commercial fishery provides some details of what occurred last year. The early fall fishery had 7 9-hour fishing periods in August, and there were some 6 some additional late fall fisheries and Coho tanglenet fisheries. So bottom of page 5 actually shows the sharing for preseason versus postseason. So the top table, for those who can't see it, shows Snake River wild impacts and Lower River hatchery impacts. The preseason plan was 70-30 for Snake River wild, and LRH was sport was 74% and commercial was 26%. When you look postseason, it landed quite a bit different, with a little under 60% for Snake River wild to sport and 42% to commercial. And LRH was 67% to sport and commercial 33%. To note, when you look at total bright harvest, sport harvested 32,800 brights, and commercial harvested 14,100, and then, or that was the preseason plan, and then actually what transpired was 30,100 brights and commercial 20,400 brights. Also provided on page 6, again, not going to walk through this. This provides that this is the fall model that lays out the impact rates for Snake River wild, Lower River hatchery, wild B, index steelhead, Upriver Coho to Bonneville Dam passage, and as well as chum, and the sharing, and how each individual fishery was planned on this fall model. The second fall model, which is page 7, shows the actual postseason estimate. So that's the one that would show you what days fisheries were open and how many fish by stock were caught. So this again is for your reference. And moving on to page 8 is a preseason versus postseason actual coho harvest and exploitation rates. So this shows the harvest summary for coho by fishery type, and then the exploitation rate. And so the total harvest preseason for coho, including ocean fisheries, was 82,900. Postseason coho was 62,500 for Columbia River coho. And then the exploitation rate, the preseason was 16.87%, and postseason came in well under the allowed 18% at 6.72%. So with that, we're going to move into 2021. So John, are you ready? And you will have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, I have you.
All right, thanks. I can go through that section. I'll try and move through it at a decent pace so we can have time for questions. So looking at 2021 forecast, the first thing here we have is the Upper Columbia Summer Chinook. The pre-PFMC forecast is for 77,600, and that will change after finalization of the ocean fisheries. But considering this year's run size, the Oregon-Washington policy guidance regarding allocation of the impacts for summer Chinook is not concurrent. Or the Oregon rule allocates non-treaty sharing downstream of Priest Rapids Dam as 80% recreational and 20% commercial, whereas the Washington policy has the sharing at 70% recreational, 30% commercial, based on the forecasted abundance. Therefore, staff in our modeling will be looking at 70% for recreational, which complies with the Washington policy, and 20% commercial, aligning with the Oregon policy, and leaving 10% unallocated at this time. But even with that, the improved forecast for this year should provide for recreational fishing opportunity in all sections of the Columbia River, and we're just kind of looking at the modeling and looking at a June 16th start, mark selective fishery, 2 fish limit, or preliminary thoughts. And based on that, rough draft modeling indicates that the lower river would be open through about July 4th. So to give you some idea. In terms of allowable commercial gears, the current Oregon-Washington policy guidance is also not concurrent there. Oregon rules don't allow the use of gill nets in the summer season main stem commercial fisheries, but the Washington policy does. And at this time, viable gears are not readily available for the commercial fleet. So therefore, no fishery is expected to occur given those constraints. The first in-season run size update is for that summer Chinook run is typically not available until around the 1st of July or so. Moving on to sockeye, this year's forecast is just under 156,000, which is 69% of the 10-year average and about half of last year's return. The allowable non-treaty impact rate for that stock is 1%, so about 1,560 fish for fisheries downstream of Highway 395. That does provide for some retention opportunity, maybe not as robust as last year. So maybe looking at a June 16th start, maybe a 1 fish limit. Haven't really done a lot with that yet, but moving on to the next page, some information on the Upriver summer steelhead. That forecast this year is including Skamania, A index and the B index fish is 101,400. I think that's really similar to last year's forecast, which was right at 100,000. and it does continue that slump we've been in since about 2017. Specifically, the A index forecast is 89,200, of which 27,500 would be wild, and the B index is at 7,600, of which 1,000 would be wild. So about 97,000 A, if you just look at it as A and B index. The non-treaty fisheries are allowed 2% impact on those wild A and wild B index fish. And given the poor expected return for the upriver steelhead this year, fishery restrictions similar to what we've had in recent years are likely. And those examples of those restrictions include a daily bag limit of not more than one hatchery steelhead when steelhead retention is open. We'll have those thermal angling closures at Eagle Creek, Herman Creek, and Deschutes on the Oregon side. Those are now captured in Oregon permanent rule. Excuse me. Also, probably have to incorporate rolling block steelhead closures for the main stem and some tributary recreational fisheries. Basically, we're still working on that, but probably expectations will be very similar to last year's block closures. And those are listed here on the middle of page 9 for your review for that's what we had last year. Moving on to fall Chinook policy guidance, that is concurrent for the most constrained fall Chinook stock, and the guidance is no more than 70% for recreational fisheries and not less than 30% for commercial fisheries. Both policies allow gill nets in zone 4-5. Within the Oregon rule, there is a limit on the use of for use in lower river alternative gear commercial fisheries of 2 percentage points of the commercial allocation. And maybe it's easier to look at that as 2 out of 30, which translates to just under 7% of the commercial allocation is available for alt gears. Policy guidance for the recreational sport fishery objectives are not concurrent. The Oregon rule includes some season objectives for fall recreational fisheries as shown below, but the Washington policy does not provide that same guidance anymore. So just as a review, on page 9, we've included what the current Oregon fall fishery objectives are, and I consider these as Chinook retention objectives. So for Bonneville, buoy 10 to tongue point, the Oregon fall recreational objectives is for some Chinook retention August 1 through Labor Day, and then it defines that as 34 days, assuming Labor Day is September 3rd, but we've tried to get through the real Labor Day whenever possible. For tongue point to Warrior Rock, the objectives call for Chinook retention August 1 through September 7th, non-mark selective, and then an additional week of mark selective September 8th through 14. And for Warrior Rock to Bonneville Dam, the objective is August 1 through October 31 for 92 days. I do not believe that speaks to Zone 6, but we basically are considering it similar to Warrior to Bon. And it also has guidance in the rules that if the established objectives for main stem recreational fisheries are predicted to be met, then any additional opportunity for main stem commercial fisheries shall be provided. So we'll get back to this in a bit when we talk about our modeling. But so for the lower river Tule fall Chinook, the preliminary pre-PFMC forecast is 73,100. That will change some as we go through the PFMC process. The total ocean and Columbia River ER limit, which is a combined limit at that run size, is 38%. So we're kind of where we've been. We can't get up to the 41% until we get a larger run size. I think it's around 85,000. But So for the Columbia River right now, we're looking at around a exploitation rate of around 11%. And that will all change as we go through the PFMC process. We state here that LRH, these lower river tules, may be the most constraining, but I think as we work through our modeling, it is the most constraining fall chinook stock, particularly at buoy 10. So next page, page 10, top of that page, we look at Snake River Wild, Upriver Bright, Fall Chinook. The preliminary forecast this year, again, pre-PFMC fisheries, is 354,200. So that's better than last year's return. And based on that forecast, the allowable non-treaty Upriver Bright harvest rate is less than or equal to 15%. And then we provide a table here that in the middle of page 10 that looks at last year's forecasts for each of the fall chinook stocks and then the actual return, and then compares that to this year's forecast for each stock. So for the LRH last year, we had a forecast of 50,000. They actually came in at 78, and right now we're at 73.1. So we're still below the 10-year average of around 86,000, but kind of in the same ballpark as last year's actual. Lower River Wilds forecast at 20,000. That's pretty similar to the 10-year average. Lower River Brights at 8,800 forecast is better than last year and greater than the 10-year average of about 5,600. Bonneville Pool Hatchery forecast this year at just under 47,000 is less than the 10-year, which is about 71,000. Not too much below last year's actual return. The Upriver Bright forecast of 354,000 that we have right now pre-PFMC, that's about 50% of the 10-year average, but a nice uptick from last year's actual return that came in just under 300. Let's see, for Snake River Wild subcomponent there, we've got a prediction of 11,000 compared to 12,300 actual last year. For those pool upriver brights that we call pubs, last year we had a little bit of an unexpected jump from 69,000 forecast to 102,000 actual. This year's forecast is in between there at 77,400. That's still below the 10-year average of 93,000. And the select area bright or SAB fall chinook have really gone downhill. Last year's forecast was 1,000. The actual return was 400, and this year's forecast is 500. That compares to the 10-year average of 9,800. So overall, collectively, we're looking at a forecast pre-PFMC of about 581,000 fall chinook to the Columbia. That's really similar to last year's return of 575, and it's about 80% of the 10-year average. Moving on to Coho. Our current harvest matrix that we're operating under has been in place since 2015. The ocean abundance for this year's forecast for ocean abundance, which is pre-ocean fisheries, is very large at 1.59 million. And that, just a reminder that number will drop substantially after ocean harvest is subtracted. So that is not the Columbia River mouth expected return. Big number. It's attracted a lot of attention and also some concerns regarding whether it's real or not. But based on the forecast, just over 1 million of those would be early stock and about 576,000 late stock. The guidelines for these lower Columbia River natural coho impacts in our policies are prioritized not in an allocation per se, but kind of in a priority status. And so priority would go to use of those impacts in select area commercial fisheries and main stem commercial chinook fisheries And in the Oregon policy, it mentions commercial hatchery coho fisheries. That's not currently in the Washington policy. Then second level is recreational fisheries, and then third order is coho directed main stem commercial fisheries. That's in both Oregon and Washington policies. The total allowed ocean and Columbia River ER on that stock this year is 30% on the LCN coho. In terms of policy guidance regarding commercial gears, here again, we're not concurrent specific to coho. The Oregon rules do not allow the use of 6-inch gill nets for coho directed fisheries, while the Washington policy does allow it. And then just a note that barbless hooks do remain required in main stem Columbia River for recreational fisheries from the mouth upstream to the Oregon-Washington border above McNary Dam. And then there's a note here that additional information is available in the NOAA guidance letters, which are issued annually, and I think those were distributed at least, I think those were sent out and available to anybody that wants it.
So John,
Uh-huh.
I think we're just going to check in with Jeremy Jordan. He's on the call to see if there's anything he wants to highlight that we might have missed.
Okay, thank you.
Quick check-in. Jeremy, if you're on, can you unmute yourself?
Hello, this is Jeremy Jordan, National Marine Fisheries Service. Can you hear me, Ryan?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right. So no, I do appreciate the check-in. John did hit on our annual guidance letter, which sets the ESA limits for ESA listed stocks. I did see it in the materials sent around for this meeting, I guess, in terms of the information John just went over. For folks wondering where in that letter, I guess pages 6 through 8 are the elements that speak to lower Columbia River chinook, which John did mention the Thule rate this year is based on an abundance forecast and is allowable 38%. And then for the Columbia River coho information he went over, that's on page 15. We are in the very high category, so a 30% allowable rate. And those are the pieces of the guidance letter that are relative to Columbia River fisheries. So any questions, feel free to get a hold of me at folks' convenience. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, John, I think you're still up. Thank you.
All right, so moving on a little more in depth for 2021 fisheries. Some background on our track record for ESA impacts. For Snake River Wild impact rate, we did exceed the allowable rate in 17 and 18 and made some adjustments, but also started to shift, to better runs and a higher allowable rate. So we were within our rate in 2019 and 20. And for Thule impact rates, we've done pretty good and only exceeded that twice collectively since 2005. On the top of page 11, we provided a table with some detail for the past several years, comparing the different fisheries with our Snake River Wild impact expectations going into the season, and then what the outcome was post-season. Just more for reference for anybody that's interested. I think for those that can see it, there's some red numbers in our what's on the screen here that kind of point out the areas and years where we exceeded our expectations substantially. But anyway, it's mostly for reference for folks. I won't go over all those. So moving on to management constraints on the preseason Upriver Bright and Snake River Wild forecasts are sufficient to put us over the thresholds needed to get the 15%, operate under the 15% harvest rate. So unlike last year, we're clearly in that bracket. Last year, we were worried that we might, there was potential to end up in the 8.25, so we managed more conservatively. However, it's worth noting that in recent years, the initial in-season run size update that occurs in mid-September has averaged about 80% of the final URB run size. That's for the last 3 years, so that can affect plans for post-update fisheries. Just a word of caution. Looking at harvest rates in recreational fisheries, we like to remind anglers that things have changed over time. When we look at buoy 10, the angler effort there fluctuates up and down with the annual salmon returns, and has kind of remained fairly stable over the last decade compared to years prior to 2010. However, the chinook handle rates have generally been increasing in recent years. But when we look at the lower Columbia River fall recreational fishery upstream of buoy 10, both effort and catch rates have increased significantly over time. We've provided some average trips per year by decade, if you will. In the 80s, we had about 40,000 trips per year and 54,000 trips per year in the 90s, 94,000 trips per year in the 2000s, and then kind of a drop here since 2010, but still much higher than it used to be. But what's really of note is that the annual fall chinook catches in that fishery have increased substantially from around 2,300 during the 1980s up to 19,000 in the 2010s. So a lot more fish being caught in that area due to changes in angling practices. In terms of non-target handle and recreational fisheries, just a little something we've been looking at, and it's worth letting people know. But for a variety of reasons in recent years, which has included higher chinook catch rates, varying URB allowable harvest rates, steelhead closures, and lower coho mark rates, a lower proportion of the fish handled in our fall fisheries are being retained, which results in more release mortalities. And during certain times in different recreational fishery components, we've had anglers express concern over the high number of non-target fish that are being caught and released. In 2009, as an example, the lower Columbia River remained open for hatchery coho when the chinook retention closed, and that was to allow access to that expected high hatchery coho return. However, with retention of most of the salmonids prohibited, which included all of the chinook, all of the steelhead, and unmarked coho, the ratio of target to non-target salmonids was low, and over 50% of all the salmonids handled that year were released. And so in 2020, based on that much lower coho forecast, staff went ahead and closed angling for salmonids in the Tongue Point to Bonneville area whenever chinook retention was prohibited as a way to reduce that non-target handle, and that resulted in 25% of the total handle being non-target or released. So it has a significant effect, and just something worth considering. This year's high coho forecast will probably, most people would want to leave coho open throughout the river, but we just wanted to mention the potential consequences. It really depends on what our chinook seasons end up being too. Just a note, at buoy 10, coho has almost always remained open when chinook has closed, since the coho catch rates are much higher, so more target fish are available since they bite well there. So moving on to page 12, some additional 2021 management approach, which includes several assumptions and rationales. One of those, our current models incorporate the FRAM output from PFMC number 1, alternative 1B. And alternative 1B currently on LRH exceeds the 38% allowed. So some tweaks will need to occur in order to get back under that allowed. Sorry, lots of phones going off. We're currently also assuming that in river we're targeting about a 10.5% LRH ER exploitation rate, and on our Snake River Wild we're targeting that 15% limit as our cap for the whole season, all fisheries combined. So in terms of fall Chinook, the allocations commission guidance is for no less than 30% for commercial fisheries and no more than 70% for recreational fisheries for the most constraining stock, which is the LRH Thule Chinook this year. And recreational Chinook fishery objectives, which we laid out on page 9 from the Oregon policy, did guide our initial modeling because they are in permanent rule and still in effect. So we discussed what those objectives were, but it's challenging. It's a balancing act to achieve all of these guidance, getting 30% for commercial and also getting to all these fishery objectives. So we utilized in our initial modeling some mark selective time at buoy 10 to try and meet that Labor Day objective. We've done that in the past, specifically 2013 to 16. There was some components of mark selective in the buoy 10 season to try and reach that objective Labor Day date. In our modeling, the objectives for Tongue Point to Bonneville Dam do match the Oregon policy or rule objectives. Tongue Point to West Puget Island in our modeling is open concurrent with the Tongue Point to Warrior Rock area. So we just wanted to point that out, that is open as part of the Tongue Point, the larger Tongue Point to Warrior fishery. And we did include or tried very hard to reserve Chinook mortalities to cover any Coho directed fisheries and provide some protection there to keep those open. Our steelhead modeling is not yet complete, but the recreational and commercial fisheries right now are expected to be within the allowable impact rate. So the next page, not going to go over this. For those that have been around a while, this is what we refer to as the MR model, and there's usually a series of these that evolve throughout this process. We're calling this just our base model right now. We've only got one main model completed, and it just captures all of the stock specific expectations for the different fisheries and then bundles it up in the top there and summarizes it in a variety of ways in terms of different sharing and compares it to our allowed guidelines. So I think we can skip past this. And so that model incorporates recreational and commercial seasons, which we've kind of pulled out and summarized in a couple of separate tables, which now that I think about it, Ryan, were we going to go over these now, or did we want to save these for the breakout sessions?
Let's save the details for the breakout. But yeah, I think just, highlighting what is in the model and what they sort of mean. But yeah, again, these tables are specific for the breakout discussion.
Right. So sometimes we'll have a whole variety of options when we either at this first Columbia River meeting or the second one. Here we just we were able to get one base model done that tries to achieve the fall recreational objectives outlined in the Oregon rule, and we'll go over the details later. We also just threw in some, I don't know, we call it other approach, but they're more for like a reference. You know, a lot of times at buoy 10, we used to just open it August 1 and run chinook retention until we ran out of impacts. So there's kind of an example there, and we're still working on some other requests, but that's, oh, and then for commercial, basically just pulled out the information that's in that our MRR modeling and kind of synthesized it here and laid it out by week for both the early fall and late fall seasons, and also select areas. And so I think with that, that concludes what we were gonna, oh, do you want to go to some ocean conversation?
Yeah, so thank you, John. I think we're gonna next let Wendy walk through the ocean fishery options, just so we've provided that information, what came out PFMC 1. Wendy, I can present if you'd like, if you're ready.
That would be great, Ryan. Thank you.
All right, 1 second, let me switch screens. All right, I think it's up and running for you, Wendy.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So the Pacific Fishery Management Council adopted, as usual, 3 ocean fishery options at their March council meeting that concluded last Thursday. For the north of Falcon fisheries, the 3 options included 2 that allow fishing and 1 in which the ocean fishery is completely closed. So alternative 3 closes the ocean north of Cape Falcon completely to salmon fishing. So I'll run over kind of really quickly the details of alternatives 1 and 2. The chinook tack, then that's the overall allowable catch in both the commercial and sport fisheries, is a total of 60,000 in alternative 1 and 50,000 in alternative 2. And that compares to 54,000 for the 2020 season. The Coho allowable catch for the 2 gear types combined is 80,000 in alternative 1 and 110,000 in alternative 2. And that compares to 28,500 in 2020. I'd note that the Coho quotas under consideration are still relatively small for the ocean fisheries, although they're an increase over the 2020 season. For the most part, the total allowable catches are split between the commercial and recreational fisheries gear types according to the FMP framework plan. So the framework plan provides us some guidelines on allocating that total allowable catch to the troll fishery and the sport fishery. And then within the sport fishery, it dictates a split among port areas. So alternative 1 follows those guidelines and allocates 32,000 chinook and 4,800 coho to the troll fishery. There is a trade included in that option that provides 8,000 coho from the troll fishery to the sport fishery in exchange for 2,000 chinook. In alternative 2, where the overall TAC is 110,000, we deviated from the allocation framework plan. And the point of that was to try to minimize impacts on our less abundant coastal Washington coho stocks and maximize opportunity on the more abundant Columbia River stocks. So We allocated 90,000 total coho according to the framework plan, but then added an additional 20,000 to the Ocean Area 1 fishery, which is the area off the Columbia River. So in alternative 2, the commercial TAC is, or commercial quota, I should say, is 25,000 Chinook and 14,400 marked coho. There is no trade in this alternative at this time, but that could be considered in April. Can you go on to the next page, please, Ryan? Thank you. So the troll fishery is structured as usual with a May-June Chinook-directed fishery where coho is not allowed to be retained. And then that's followed up by a July through September all species fishery where we do allow retention of marked coho. The biggest difference, there's some minor differences in landing limits and things like that, but the biggest difference between these two alternatives is the consideration of a 27-inch minimum size restriction for Chinook in alternative 1, and alternative 2 has the more traditional 28-inch size limit. Next page, please, Ryan. And this page just details the summer fishery and talks a little bit about some of the restrictions that apply to both options. And next page, please, Ryan. For the recreational fishery, the overall allowable catch in option 1 or alternative 1 is 28,000 Chinook and 75,200 marked coho. And in alternative 2, those numbers are 25,000 Chinook and 95,600 marked coho. And again, you can notice an increase in the allowable harvest of coho in the second option due to that 20,000 that we added in to the recreational fishery only. If you go down to the next page, please, Ryan. In both options, most areas are opening on June 19th this season. The exception to that is the next page down is the Columbia River area, which opens June 14th in alternative 1. In both alternatives, we include a coho non-retention period in mid-June. So that's the fishery opens with a coho non-retention period. That's followed by the all species fishery beginning either in late June or early July. And so that's really similar to what we did in 2020, where we had about a week and a half of Chinook only fishing. The bag limits vary between alternatives and between areas. The areas are all open 7 days per week in both alternatives, with the exception of the Westport area, which is open 5 days per week during the all species fishery. And then the closing dates in all alternatives are the earlier of either September 30th or attainment of the coho or Chinook quotas. And in all ocean fisheries, both commercial and recreational, only marked coho may be retained. So that was all I had to present for the ocean alternatives.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm going to pull the agenda back up. So 1 second, everyone. So we've concluded our staff presentation. Right before we jump to questions or comments, I'm just going to do a check-in with staff if there's anything else they want to make mention of or highlight that we may have went over or maybe omitted. So just a quick staff check-in regarding our presentation. All right, so we're on to our question comment section. I'm just doing a time check. This meeting for the main session is going to conclude 11:50. If we get done early, we can get ahead to the breakout sessions early. But The intent of the questions, comments is to help you better understand policy or the ESA limitations or run sizes or considerations for this year's fisheries. I ask if you can reserve fishery specific thoughts for the breakout sessions. I know sometimes the two are entangled, but if you can do your best, that'd be helpful. So I'm going to go back to ground rules and just going to leave it on this page for those who are on their computer, but just remember, stay on mute. There'll be, Mertice and I are going to do our best to take names and try to call you as we get folks' hands go up, whether it's virtually or they state their name when we ask for them. So we might have to do this in a couple different pulses. So just be aware of that. And just remember, stay on mute if you're not speaking, and stay on topic regarding the fisheries at hand. Listen, speak and act professionally, all the standard respectful manners for commenting. So with that, just remember that *6 brings you off mute if you're on the phone, because we did have to mute everyone because we were getting feedback. But you can also click the unmute button if you're dialed in. So going to take names. So Mertice, if you can help watch the virtual hands, we'll do a quick name request and then we'll circle through speakers or commenters, and then we'll get going. So I already see one. David Moskowitz, I have you down. So go ahead, raise your hand virtually. Otherwise, if you don't, one at a time, please. Speak your name and I'll put you on a list.
Ryan Monroe Jr., just a quick one after Moskowitz.
Okay, I have you, Bill, down as well. Thank you. So again, *6 to unmute your phone. Provide me your name if you're on the phone, or if you're dialed in, you can, or if you're linked in.
This is Rob Sudar. I've got one short comment, but I may lose my signal here within the next few minutes. So if I'm not there when you call back, that's why.
Got it. Okay, I have you down, Rob. Any other names? All right, I'll circle back to see if there are others. So we'll go ahead and get started. David Moskowitz, you're up first.
Hi, Brian, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. David Moskowitz with Conservation Angler. Thanks to staff for the presentation and the materials. And my question has to do with the summary of 2020 returns and kind of actual fishery harvests. And in some, there's information about tribal treaty fishery harvest, and some there's not. And I wondered if that information is in the tables on page 6 and 7. I just haven't seen it, but I just wondered where, if you are summarizing actual tribal harvest, and that's my question at this point. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Maybe I'll walk through these three. We'll hit up the answers what we can, or then we'll circle back. So Bill, this buys staff a little time just to prepare if there are some questions we can answer. So Bill, you're next. Bill Monroe Jr.
Hey guys, morning staff. Thanks for everything. I'm gonna wait for pretty much everything until the breakout session. I think option 1 looks really good on the MSR. Can you just clarify for the general public the meanings of, I'm trying to do my best, but MSF for marked select fisheries and non-marked select fisheries, and then CHF and all that other stuff, just so we can clarify everything. This is all formality stuff, and I actually want to get Rob Sudar to talk because we're going to lose him. So I'll get off this.
Thank you, Bill. Robert, you're next then.
Can you hear me at this point?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that staff clarify when you're listing the sharing last year, that it's important to note which times the total allowable was used between the two fisheries. The sharing within the fisheries is not the same as what percentage of the allowable was used. In other words, if the whole 15% isn't used for upriver brights, then the sharing within the two groups isn't really reflective of what it could have been if all the impacts, or would have been if all the impacts have been used. So I just think it's kind of a subtle point, but in some instances it can make it look like one group used more than they were supposed to, and it just means that they used their whole share of the available, but the other group might not have. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Robert.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm going to quickly do before we answer some questions that we can provide some info on. Just seeing if I see Randy Woosley. So have you listed other names? *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, Randy, go ahead.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the model for recreational fishing at buoy 10 certainly looks better than last year. I don't know if I call it a concern, but the question I would have is there an in-season mechanism in that model to protect the Coho fishery as we move past Labor Day? That particular fishery is maybe the most important part of the recreational fishery this year, which is kind of different from years gone by, where the chinook fishery was obviously the most sought after and important fishery. But with the amount of resource we have coming, I'm just wondering what in-season mechanism there would be to protect that fishery. Thanks.
Thank you, Randy. I see Bob Reese. I'm going to do another check on names. Anyone else on the phone for names? Pretty soon we're gonna answer questions and see where we are on time. So provide me a name if you want to provide a comment or a question quickly now, or otherwise I'll move on to Bob. All right, go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, you guys, again for the tremendous amount of work you're doing here. Greatly appreciated. I was talking with a colleague last night and wondered if there was any possibility to model what the cost might be, the opportunity cost to model a mark select Chinook opportunity past Labor Day. I know that's beyond the objective, but if there's anything that we despise more, it's releasing a hatchery salmon in our traditional shoulder seasons when they're still somewhat abundant in the river, especially given the mortality rate associated with that warm water release. But if there's a way to gauge what the benefit would be for mark select opportunity beyond what you have as side rails here, we'd greatly appreciate seeing that.
Thank you, Bob. All right, so I'm going to do a quick check-in on some of the questions with staff to see if we can help folks understand what we presented. I have some stuff listed down here, but Wondering if staff can help me answer some of the questions I have. Where some of the tree impact rates, catch estimates are, definitions of the acronyms, the sharing allowable versus actual, in-season protective coho measures, and then I just got Bob's request there for consideration, which is probably pertinent for the rec breakout, but regarding the Oregon rule. So just wanted to check in with staff who wants to jump in on some of those answers real quick, and then I can help fill in some blanks.
Ryan, this is Cindy. I can take the first one, which was the request for the treaty numbers. Those are shown in the MR postseason model on page 7. And so there's a row there for treaty catch. And then up in the left-hand corner, there's a spot for treaty impacts. David Moskowitz asked that one.
Thank you, Cindy.
This is John, just maybe jumping one question, but on Robert's request, I totally agree. Old habits are hard to break, but we need to present those things, percentages, as out of the available, not out of the used, because it does change the numbers, and the policies all assumed everything would be used. So I support his request.
Thank you, John. I guess I missed the second acronym you mentioned, Bill Monroe Jr., but the first one was the MSF and non-MSF. That is, MSF stands for Mark Selective Fishery. So that's where you retain the adipose clipped chinook in this example, and release the a chinook with an adipose fin intact. So it's retaining essentially, a way to think about it is the hatchery fish, although there are some hatchery fish that are not marked, but that's one way to think about it. And so then you would, non-MSF is well, kind of just mentioned that piece. That's where you can keep hatchery or wild, clipped or unclipped fish. That's the difference between the two is a regulation on what you have to release, and that is the unclipped versus the clipped. And heard some mechanisms on.
Yeah, Ryan, that was a formality. That was a formality question. I totally understand that. The CHF element also needs to be explained. I just want everybody to understand what we were looking at. That's all. I totally get it.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate you asking the question for others. And I think there's Randy had the question on Coho protective measures. I think that's a very good rec breakout, one to get in the detail, but and then just checking in, and then Bob's request past Labor Day for Mark Selective, that's a rec breakout piece, but unless Oregon wants to address that regarding the Oregon rule, but I think Bob recognized that element was an issue. So checking with staff, anything else on those questions you heard that we missed before we move on to other names?
This is John. None that wouldn't be better covered in the breakout, so we'll hit them then.
All right. So we still have some time for, we're still on track on time, I guess is one way to look at it, which is good. So I do see 2 hands. I've got Greg King, and then I see Bob as a guest. I'll just write that. Bob Daniel, I see your hand. I'll call on you when it's your turn. Just checking on the phone line. Let's go ahead and make this the last round of name calling, or sorry, not name calling, that's the wrong way to phrase it. Hands going up so I can call on your name to provide a comment. So last chance, and then you obviously have a chance within the breakout sessions. So please provide me your name if you haven't already done so. And I see Susie's hand. So remember, if you're on the phone and you're trying to provide your name, *6 to unmute.
And Ryan, this is Tucker. I believe *9 might actually raise your hand if you're on the phone.
It's a possibility. I'm not certain on Teams. All right. So with that, we'll just assume people are saving some questions, comments for the breakout sessions. So I will close taking names. So we have 3 names. Greg King first. You're up.
Can you hear me, Ryan?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Ryan. Thank you. Good morning, Oregon and Washington staff. My question, and you probably guys could answer it in the breakout, is I'm not seeing the West Puget Island to Warrior Rock this year, and I'm wanting to know why it's not in the modeling for this year, as it had been the last 2 years. So answer that in the breakout. That's fine, Ryan.
Thank you, Greg. We can address it there in detail. Bob, you're up.
If you're referencing me, I apologize. I took my hand down. I was late in that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's not you, Bob Reese. It's a different Bob. It says Bob Guest, so I don't have a last name to go with.
It's Robert. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, yes.
Robert Moxley, Columbia River Advisor.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of these fisheries. Couple things. It looks like in 2019, if I'm reading that right, 53% of all salmon caught were released. Boy, at what point is this a catch and release fishery? Is it days on the water or dollars on the water? The question I have for staff is, have we ever actually done a study in regards to release mortality in the fall with salmon, coho and chinook? Wouldn't mind an answer on that one. And if not, maybe it's time we look into that. Seems how we're releasing just as many fish, if not more, than we are retaining. The other concern on the modeling for the wreck, I see buoy 10 would fish through the 6th on the chinook, but Tongue Point would be open on the 7th. So I think that would be very confusing for some of the recreational anglers. Since those fisheries are so close, it would be nice if we could simplify and have those dates be the same, whether it's the 7th or the 6th. The tides, I looked at the tides, they're not favorable, so I don't know that the catch is really going to be a limiting factor in that decision. But irregardless, I can guarantee you when that time comes around, I will have 20, 30 plus texts and emails. Can we keep chinook above Tongue Point? Can I go catch my 2 or 3 coho below Tongue Point? Do I have to drop it off? Is it one, it's just confusing. So if we could have those 2 dates coincide, I think that would be better for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Susie, you're last to provide comment or questions.
Oh, hi, everyone. This is Susie Beer. I'm an advisor on the Columbia River Recreational Advisory Board. I just had a quick question. Feel free to skip it if we run out of time. It's slightly off topic. But I was just concerned about the whale that was seen upstream on the Columbia River. So I was wondering if anyone had an update and if there was a plan to get it home safely if it's not already. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I don't have the latest answer on that. And if someone else does, feel free to jump. but sometimes whales, yeah, it's not it's occurred before, but they usually find their way out. So I don't know the status, so we might have to circle back on that. And then the other questions, check in with John. Do you want to save those for rec breakout?
I just wanted to clarify that in this set of sport models, that tongue point to Puget Island is open concurrent with Puget Island to Warrior, like it used to be a few years ago. So whether it's right or wrong, that's what's in the model, just so people know. So.
Okay, thanks, John. All right, so I'm gonna just do a check-in with staff, Ocean team and Columbia River team. Anything else you want to share? Questions you heard you want to respond to, or just something that we need to remind folks before we move on the agenda? All right, hearing none, we're going to take a 10-minute pause to get folks get staff set up on the different breakout rooms, get public switching over for those switching to the commercial breakout. So it's 11:30 right now. So we are ahead of schedule. So that's good. We have an hour slated for the breakout sessions. Ultimately, we're going to end no later than 1. So if we end early, then we do. So recreational folks or folks interested in the recreational discussion will stay on this line. So we'll stay on here, or you can call back in, but we'll just keep everything on mute. And commercial will be on the other line with the call info provided in the agenda. So 11:40, the plan is to get started in those breakout sessions. So this is a 10-minute break and breather for staff and getting everyone situated. So I am going to sign off for the next 10 minutes. Catch you all at 11:40 with some staff will be here, some will be on the commercial room. So just to let you know. All right, thanks.
Sounds like we were having some technical difficulties, but Tim, I think, is going to display the handout. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, this is John. Great. Yeah, I was kind of waiting for that. I think that's our next step here.
And we do see the handout now, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. John North here. I guess we've got an hour available for the breakout session, but we're ahead of schedule, so we'll just see how it goes. Basically, the main thing we have to go over here is a preliminary modeling outputs and get some feedback from staff, folks, answer any questions, kind of explain our rationales. So I guess I could kind of walk through our base model and just describe it in a little more detail before we get into an exchange of any questions. Let's see. Yeah, why don't I just start there, I guess. Hopefully everybody's joined back in that wants to be on the rec breakout. But so one qualifier, we did this fairly rapidly yesterday, so we may have to go back and look at things. And of course, it's all tied to the ocean process too. So this is what we have at this point. So for buoy 10, what we looked at there in this initial approach, trying to meet the Oregon Fish and Wildlife fall recreational objectives that we talked about earlier, which was getting Chinook retention through Labor Day, and Labor Day this year is the 6th. So to get that while also meeting the sharing, the allocation objectives, we looked at a mark selective fishery for the first 13 days for Chinook, and we looked at it that way because that's when you're not a lot of brights around, more tules are a higher proportion of what's handled. The mark rate's a little better that time of year because there is more tules. Thought that was a better time to apply the mark select, keep that LRH burn down, and then shift to a non-mark select August 14th. And that would be beneficial because then your upriver brights are starting to move in, your mark rate starting to drop. Having non-mark selective at that time, you know, allows, you don't have the high release. So that's kind of why we went at it that direction. The bag limit that would be associated with this in our modeling assumed a 2 fish, 1 Chinook bag from August 1 through 9/6. So it'd be the same Chinook bag, whether it was mark select or non-mark select, just to keep things simple. And then assumed we would shift to a 3, we wrote it down as 3 fish, no Chinook, but essentially that's would be 3 hatchery coho, because there's probably a pretty good chance steelhead would be close there. It was just too complex to get into all that. So so an increased bag limit starting the day after Labor Day and continuing onward. Preliminary modeling, we weren't able to pull out just the kept very easily, so we just put the total morts here for comparison. So that fishery would result in about 26,500 total Chinook morts, of which about 9,800 would be upriver bright morts. And then following the objectives again in that Oregon rule for the tongue point to warrior area, we modeled it out exactly like it states in the Oregon rule. Non-mark selective fishery from August 1 through September 7th, and then a week of mark selective Chinook from the 8th through the 14th. The associated daily bag would be a 2 fish, 1 Chinook from August 1 through 9/14, and then Chinook would close, and the 2 fish no chinook would carry on there. Again, that's pretty much probably going to be a hatchery coho fishery. And provided the chinook morts and herb morts associated with that modeling. Warrior to bond, the Oregon policy calls for chinook retention from August 1 through October 31. So we ran that. We assumed a 2 fish, 1 chinook bag for that whole season, and then starting November 1, no chinook would be allowed, and coho catch would probably be expected to be very, very little. So effectively just close the salmonids at that point. I think we'll have to fine tune that. 19,200 total chinook morts affiliated with that fishery, and 13,400 upriver bright morts. So pretty big consumer of the upriver brights. We went ahead and paired the Zone 6 pools and the McNary to 395 to match that season, even though it's not addressed in policy, I don't believe, just to keep things simple. And associated chinook morts there is about 6,200 total and 3,600 upriver bright morts. It is, I guess I should note that the policy, the Oregon policy in terms of these recreational guidelines is not totally clear in terms of like what kind of chinook retention, but because it specifically lays out mark selective for that 1 week tongue point to warrior, then the assumption then would probably be that the goal was non-mark selective unless specified. But the problem we have is that buoy 10 uses a fair number of LRH impacts if left open, wide open from August 1 to Labor Day. So we had to achieve the allocation sharing. That's where we had to layer in that some mark select at buoy 10. And we've done that in past years to try and achieve the same Labor Day objective. So that was basically staff's main first crack model. We do note in that tongue point to Warrior Rock area that maybe there's an alternative approach there. The 1 week of mark selective hasn't been viewed very well by some fishermen because you're releasing quite a few fish. So we calculated if you use the same amount of impacts that would be associated with that 1 week and just converted it back into non-mark, that's basically a week of mark select would turn into 3 days of non-mark. And so you could have a non-mark selective fishery through September 10th in that area and burn effectively the same amount of impacts. So just a note there. And then we had some other, we call them other approaches. Washington does not have these same fall recreational objectives. So we had this one kind of a base model already set up, August 1 to August 23rd, non-mark selective at buoy 10, same bag limit, 2 fish, 1 chinook during that retention time frame, and then it would shift to a 2 fish, no chinook for August 24th through Labor Day, and then go to 3 fish right after Labor Day. We had that run. It doesn't meet the Oregon objectives of getting through Labor Day. It was kind of a base season that we've done, in past years. So we thought we'd lay that out there for comparison. And then we were trying to refine that option to try and take that approach, and what would you have to do to layer on mark selective to get through Labor Day? Probably it would require cutting down the original non-mark selective period.
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
It's Quentin. Yeah, I got that date for that approach there. It's August 1 through the 20th, non-mark. And then
20th, yep.
20th, and then it would be the 21st through the 6th, September 6th.
Okay, and you didn't happen to have any release morts associated with, or total morts associated with that fishery? I lost you, Q. It's not that important right now.
I was talking with the mute on.
Oh, okay.
Classic. Yeah. I could get those here shortly. I'm pretty close.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So Q ran that. So a different alternative that, again, does not match the Oregon policy, but just out there for discussion. August 1 through the 20th, non-mark selective. August 21st through Labor Day. And I take that back. That one would now that it's adjusted, it would meet the Oregon policy. Let's see. So I guess with that, hopefully that answers a few questions. Just again to note, MSF means mark selective, hatchery Chinook only. CHF was shorthand for false Chinook. If you see a Coho, COH anywhere, that's Coho. Anyway, with that, is there any staff that want to comment? Did I miss anything? Anything worth noting before we kind of go into some questions?
This is Quentin here. I would just add, I mean, I think you hit on it, but basically, buoy 10 for what's modeled there under the base fall objectives under the Oregon policy there. Buoy 10 and tongue point to warrior do have the non-retention to continue fishing for coho, whereas warrior, say upstream to 395, does not. That they close at the end date for all salmonids.
Thanks, Q. And with that, probably worth noting that we did our best to estimate Chinook mortalities during those coho times, and they are included in the model outputs here. That's can you confirm that, Q?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, any other staff comments? Well, with that, I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there. Let's see. I think I see Bob. Is that Robert Moxley? Did you have your hand up?
I just had a clarified question. When we were talking about the tongue point to Warrior Rock fishery, did that boundary change? Because it says in the model tongue point. So is it the top of Puget Island or tongue point? What was I guess I'm confused there.
Yeah, this modeling in this, it goes back to where we were, how many years, just a few years ago, where tongue point was part of the tongue point to Puget Island was part of the tongue point to Warrior fishery. And this goes back to that. So it's whatever the season that's noted here, the entire area from tongue point to Warrior is modeled to be open during that time frame. So different approach than last year. There's no special treatment for tongue point to Puget.
Okay. That's what I thought. And I think we closed that fishery temporarily because the lack of SRW impacts. And that was mostly a SRW fishery as far as what the rec anglers were retaining. So it makes sense to have it open if the exploitation is 15% and there's a robust upriver bright run coming. So I just wanted to clarify. Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's worth going over again because it's new to, kind of going back to where we were. But yeah, that was the issue in the past when we came out of a period of 15% SRW herb, dropped into that 8.25. We just couldn't get everything to fit. So sacrificial lamb, we got rid of it. Now we're back looking at 15%. So we brought it back in line again. Greg King, do I see a question?
Hear me, John? Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
So can we model that closure again? Because that worked really good for impacts. I mean, it for impacts on the West Puget Island to Warrior. Talking about going to that mark selective fishery from the 8th to the 14th. You were saying from the 8th to the 10th. If we modeled that closure from Tongue to West Puget Island, we maybe be able to stretch that to the 14th. And that, sorry about that. Could we model that again this year like we did last year?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm just taking notes here, so a little delay. Yeah, I think so long as it's within the Oregon Falls Chinook season objectives, since they don't speak about, what kind. I mean, technically they're very specific, right? It doesn't say non-mark 8th through the 14th. It says mark selective. So yeah, we could model it. I just don't know how it'll all shake out. But thanks for the clarification. You're not looking to go past the 14th. You're just trying to see what it would take to convert the days 8th through the 14th.
Just trying to keep it to a non-mark selective fishery there for those days with what are the impacts between Tongue and West Puget Island.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Greg. We got that. I see Chris Kern.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to put my hand back down, but at the moment, yeah, I just think, Greg, I understand your concept, and John's right. I think we can look at it from the Oregon perspective. Our policy was set up to meet the objectives and then describe how the impacts would then be allocated once those objectives were met. And so from converting the mark selective piece to a non-selective equivalent and keeping them to the same number of dead fish is one argument because it doesn't use more impacts. But when you start to stretch beyond the mark select conversion, so to speak, by adding non-select days over and above that conversion, that's something that Oregon will have to pay some attention to because it does affect those impacts. So not sure how to handle that at the moment. Obviously, it's something I think we can look at and just kind of see what it does. But that's the one concern I might have with that might come up later.
And sorry about the phone going off, guys. I apologize for that.
Thank you, Chris. I see Randy Woolsey.
Thanks, John. Just a comment. I'm sure we'll get around to several topics here, but I wanted to comment on this Tongue Point to Warrior Rock area. In years gone by, our handling of that particular area have kind of changed based on forecasts and different criteria. more recently in the last couple of years. Just kind of looking at it from a logical viewpoint, anglers go to tongue point from buoy 10. I'm sure some might make the long haul down from Puget Island or farther to come to tongue point if the fishing's good, but not very many. So tongue point to Puget Island is one of those areas that can move the needle as far as harvest and impacts, but it affects that middle part of the river, up to Warrior Rock. So I also would like to see a model of what that middle part of the river, when I say middle part of the river, Puget Island to Warrior Rock might look like if tongue point weren't open, and kind of from the anglers coming from the mouth of the river from Astoria, there's that time of year that we're kind of talking about, time of the season that we're talking about, is certainly could be taken up by that coho fishery at buoy 10, targeting on that, promoting that. My question earlier was, what things might we be able to do at buoy 10 in season or prior to the season setting, to what mechanism might there be to make sure that coho fishery is not affected. If we get into close to Memorial Day or Labor Day weekend and big numbers of chinook get caught for whatever reason, we just want to make sure we have the impacts available to continue to promote and execute that coho fishery. So those are just my comments that I'm thinking of for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I see Jim Bridwell.
Yeah, hey, thanks for the opportunity to talk. I guess my question revolves around the constraint of the tules. Was there any consideration given to maybe a later start, maybe 8-7 versus starting at an 8-1, and maybe would that answers part of what Randy's talking about, and also ensure us getting through our 2 Labor Day? The thing we all hear is, why do I have to keep putting these fish back in the water to find one or sort through fish? So I don't know if any consideration was given to that type of thing or not, but I wanted to ask the question.
Yeah, good question, Jim. Various things floated around in our hurried discussions the last few days, but it gets a little weird. I mean, if you start buoy 10 later, then you haven't met the objective of chinook retention August 1 to Labor Day. So there's some back and forth, regarding what makes sense and what the policy says specifically. So,
but I guess my pushback on that, John, would be, if you can get the same 34 days or whatever it was, what's the difference if it's 8-1 versus, you're into all these constraints when you start 8-1 because of lower river fish, and how many years do you have to either go to Mark Select or do some kind of days of the week or this type of thing? If you can get close to the amount of days, what's so magical about 8-1 versus moving it back to 8-7 if that's consistently the constraint on the fishery?
Right. No, all good questions. It kind of goes back to what Chris had brought up, is I'm sure we'll hear a lot about different ideas today, and then we'll have to figure out how they blend with the pretty hard and fast guidance within the policy of one state versus no guidance on the other state. So a little tricky at the moment, at least for me, but good point. Appreciate it. Bob Rees.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I forgot what I was going to ask. Can I don't think there's some other folks that have hands up. Can you come back to me in a minute?
Yes, we can do that. I'm looking around and I assume Jim Ridwell's hand's still up, but I think that's left over. Is there any, Butch Smith, do I see a hand?
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate the and can sympathize with the Oregon policy that was maybe crafted under so long ago. Maybe things have changed a little bit, but I sure hope, recognizing and respecting the Oregon policy, that we will also recognize and respect the Washington policy that leaves more management tools in the toolbox for the Washington managers. So I hope at least we can come out of this process, with one or two options that, respect and go by the Oregon policy. But on the likewise, I hope we can come out of here with equal amount of options that recognize the Washington policy from the commission also. So that's my hope for the day, to carry on through at least to the 1st of April. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Butch.
John, Bob Rees back here, if I could interject.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. So I remembered it was, and this may not have a lot of application in the conversation, but if we do get opportunity to fish in the early part of the season, I know there was some historical confusion about whether we could keep select area brights. I think I don't know if the fin clip remains the same at the left vent versus maybe no adipose fin clip, but if there was clarification and justification to keep left vent clip fish during the mark select fishery when those fish are most prominent there, I'd love to be able to have that option.
I appreciate it, Bob. It's a good point. Kind of ironic. We did that in other years when we were trying to increase brood, I believe, and we're so far below those years it's not even funny. They are not in great shape. So hadn't really talked about it yet, but that is a tool that we might want to consider. Anyway, yeah, what was our expected return to the river mouth? Like several hundred fish. It used to be like 20,000. So, duly noted.
Hey, John, this is Charlene. I just feel like a logistics thing. If you've got your hand raised, but you're done commenting, you can just go back to the hand raise function and click on the hand again, and it should lower your hand, because I think otherwise over time it might get hard to tell who's got a repeat comment and who's new. So it could help us out a little bit there. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlene. I see a new person, new hand, Jesse Vassar.
Yeah, thanks, John. Jesse Vassar, Columbia River Recreational Advisory member. I, for one, actually, I guess, am in favor of the proposal that we have here. I think that looks pretty good as far as days on the water. The one thing that, and I know Robert had mentioned this earlier, but just from a logistics standpoint, I think it might make sense to kind of line up the days with tongue point as far as if that's going to go mark select or non-mark select, whatever that looks like, coinciding that with the 6th for buoy 10 closing, just to kind of simplify that process there. I did have the same question as Bob Reese just asked about the SABs there. And then going with that a little bit further, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time for this, but at some point, I'd just like to get a little bit of an idea or update on where we're at with the potential for opening back up that Young's Bay bubble. You know, one of the things that we hear, there's just a lot of misunderstanding or frustration with recreational anglers out there as to why we continue to keep that closed. And if those SABs are the constraining stock for opening that bubble up, what is the plan going forward as far as increasing the output of those, if there is one? Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. I think go to Chris Kern here. I think he might have some comments on a couple of those things. I do see David Moskowitz, and we'll get to him right after Chris, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's quick. I just wanted to respond to the comment Butch made. Just to make sure you're aware, Butch, I agree with you. I don't see this as a place where we want to, given that we do have some differences in the policies right now that may or may not get resolved on some time scale. I'm not pushing to get one over the other. So I would expect that we try and capture a range of things that aren't necessarily constrained to just the Oregon perspective on objectives. So just wanted to get that out there. I mean, I think from my perspective, we need something that reflects that we can point to in Oregon, but I don't feel it has to be the only thing there. So just to make sure you're aware, I agree with you on that. I wanted to make sure to get that out before I got too far away. Thanks.
All right, Chris, I thought you were going to speak to the Young's Bay bubble, which I think still exists in permanent rule in Oregon, and until the commission addresses it, it'll remain there.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing, but yeah, I forgot to address that, but I don't have anything different to add to that. We have asked for it before, and it's been chosen to leave it in place. So that's where it stands.
Thank you. And just back to Jesse on the SABs. I mean, whether we want to or not, increase, we're basically at the mercy of what returns at this point. We have no other mechanism. So it's very hard to rebuild a run when you don't have a run coming back. So let's go to David Moskowitz.
Hey, John North, Bill Monroe. I'd like to go after David Moskowitz. Sorry about that. I can't wait.
Thank you. Got you in the queue. Okay. David, go ahead.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And Bill, you're going to have to stop following me around. Okay. Let's see. A couple questions on one of the, I guess on the, which page is that? Might be top of the 21 expectations for steelhead, and it talks about an index forecast for Skamania A index and B index, and then it does break out the A and B wild component, but there's nothing, no breakout for wild early run summer steelhead, and so we wondered if there was is there just nothing from TAC on that yet? And just curious if there is a number that is provided for the wild portion of that Skamania run. Excuse me. And the, excuse me. Let's see. I guess we do want to say that we support in this the steelhead measure, the steelhead conservation measures that are described on page 9. We're after last year's little uptick, we're certainly saddened that we're not seeing a continuing or stabilizing number, and but I think given the numbers that are predicted, that these measures are warranted, and so we support those. And then I guess the last, trying to understand how well we're doing in terms of avoiding ESA impacts on on steelhead, particularly B-run steelhead. It was on the tables on 6 and 7, the preseason and postseason for 2020. There's the guideline and then the expected where we met them, and that the impacts were under 2%. And I just wonder where do you find the information that results in that number? Because there's obviously there's commercial, non-treaty commercial, there is treaty commercial, and there's recreational fishing, and we're just wondering where can we find all the information that is factored into the sort of under 2% estimation on impacts for the wild bees. It'd be really helpful to know where that is, given that we have a very low forecast for their returns this year. So I think at this time that those are the questions we have and the comments we'd like to make, and we'll submit some things in writing through the portal. Appreciate the opportunity to review all this information, and hope that there might be some answers that are able to be presented. If not, in the course of this meeting, perhaps as follow-up in email or a phone call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I was going to give Jeff Whistler the opportunity to just touch on, you had a couple steelhead questions. I think we have the wild Skamania, and we're not quite, we just got the final 2020 steelhead run sizes, so we have to go through the whole process of calculating the impacts throughout all the fisheries, and I think that Jeff will talk about how we're working on that. But Jeff, can you just speak to David's point?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John. Yeah, TAC does have a forecast for total Skamanias and wild Skamanias. That didn't all get captured in the handout here, but the 2021 forecast for upriver Skamanias is 4,600 total fish, and that includes 2,100 wilds. And then, yeah, as John just described, TAC just finished the 2020 run reconstruction for steelhead a week and a half ago or so. And so I'm still working on finalizing the postseason 2020 estimates by fisheries. That's going to take, I need a little more time to keep working on that. But at the very least, all of that information will be reported in the joint staff report that comes out in July. That would be the fall joint staff report that comes out on an annual basis, and that would include all of the steelhead impacts associated with the fall fisheries.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd like to go to Bill Monroe, Jr.
Good morning, John. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Cool. I don't mean to follow Moskowitz around. It's just kind of how it works out. So, whoops. Hey, I just wanted to look at a couple of things and just say a couple of things. What Butch and Chris Kern said sure makes sense. That's going to be a hard road to follow to find concurrency. I'm hoping that one day, sooner rather than later, we'll be able to kind of get along again on both states. Not an easy road, and I hope it gets worked out either way. I did want to say that overall, that preliminary modeling result on the fall objective, the base looks good. I really think it provides the most opportunity across the board in multiple zones. Even with some other, options out there that are being asked about, this one still looks the best. The other approaches actually look a little less opportunistic while increasing exploitation rates. I don't think that's a good idea. But I sure do like the fact that that the base model for that first 13 days on a March slot fishery still gets us through to Labor Day. It provides the best possible, opportunity base. Just kind of wanted to be in support of what we're seeing that is put in front of us from all this stuff that you guys have done, which is extensive. So with that, I don't need to talk anymore. I just wanted to say thanks, and I'll keep listening here.
Thank you, Bill. I think, do we have Susie in the queue here? Go ahead, Susie. Oh. Yep.
Yes, hi, thank you. So I'm going to be referencing page 11 here about the non-target handle in recreational fisheries. I was curious if we had kind of a breakdown of the handling impacts by season. I've heard from fishermen in the fall, the risk of hooking another species is low. I don't know if that's really necessarily true, but if it were to be true, you could kind of make the argument that maybe mortality rates would be lower if we had barbed hooks. That way you weren't, hooking and losing a bunch of fish before actually landing one.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we do have some material on that. To me, it's kind of something that's just come about over time, especially when we entered the more restrictive fall chinook impact limits and had to close seasons earlier. You end up with a longer period where fewer of the fish out there are retainable, and also we had that coincided with the poor steelhead forecast, so you ended up with more fish that couldn't be retained than could be retained, and so that just something we wanted to point out. We could probably bring a little more back to the next meeting. Did you have anything else, Susie? Oh, you mentioned just support for barbed hooks, I guess. Okay, made a note of that. I saw Steve Watrous somewhere.
Yeah, I'm here. You hear me, John?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I want to say I'm sympathetic to the position you're in and the rest of the staff with the way the two states have put you, the position they put you in. And I want to say I'm thankful for Chris's comments, because one of my comments was going to be that neither state's policy or lack of policy should trump the others. And I was glad to hear Chris acknowledge that he understands that and is willing to work with something other than just a strict policy decision by the Oregon Commission. And piggybacking on that and Bob Bridwell's comments, I want to remind everybody that in the beginning, when buoy 10 was evolving, the traditional and historical opening date of buoy 10 was August 16th. And it wasn't until the Joe Blum Reign of Terror that August 16th was changed to August 1st. So there is a precedence for a later start date. And I know that those early days in August are usually freebies pretty much. But if there was a way of making enough savings to even add one more day of non-mark selective, my people would think it was worth it. Commenting on the options and other approaches that you've got on the table, that last other approach where you go to a mark selective fishery about the same time that the upriver brights show up, my guys would just go ballistic if that happened. Have to have their non-mark selective fishery and then all of a sudden have to start releasing all those upriver brights when they showed up. That would be a non-starter. I'm sure I'm repeating myself over and over, but the people I hear from hate Mark Selective, and I hear from them all the time that they would rather just open it up, let her rip, close her down when we run out. And but I understand that that's not a popular position with those who make money off of the fishery. So I'm aware of that. Let's see, there was a couple other things. I'd like to know before we have our next meeting, what our projected mark rate is on the summers this year. And also, I believe that in the Oregon policy, there's some language concerning that Labor Day date, and it revolves around September 3rd, as maybe you're supposed to consider that that's the same as Labor Day or whatever. Could you clarify on that and tell me how that fit into your thinking? And then the last thing would be, Quentin, if you're still on the line, going to make another pitch for having the information ready and to hopefully talk about that Wind River problem we have up there with inconsistent regulations on the main stem and in the bubble in the fall fishery. And I hope you guys have put together the background information and be ready to talk about that at the next meeting. At least I hope we'll have a tributary talk at the next meeting as well. And that would conclude my comments and questions.
Thank you, Steve. I'll take, we got a few people in the queue. I think if Chris, if you've got a hand up, I was going to make one comment on Steve's question, but then maybe Chris and then Cameron Black. Yeah, Steve, you acknowledged that floating Labor Day. To me, that's a particular challenge. The policy, again, is not abundantly clear. It says to Labor Day, and then it assumes Labor Day is September 3rd or 34 days. Yeah, from a modeler standpoint, it would be nice if that was a fixed date, because it can vary 6 days over the years. So struggled with that, but in this case, we tried to get to the actual Labor Day in our modeling. So with that, Chris, did you have any comments, or you just got your hand up?
No, I have a couple quick ones. I just want to make sure I'm clear, and I don't think Steve said anything different. First of all, Steve, good to hear from you. I don't think he said anything different, but I want to take the time to make sure I was clear on the policy differences. I cannot say today whether Oregon can go to a different policy option for these fisheries. What I was trying to express is that, allowing the latitude to model policies or fisheries that are consistent with both states' policies is clearly something we should be looking at here. But I do want to make it clear to people, it is unclear to me at this point whether Oregon could change anything. That's to be determined. I think I made that clear earlier, but I want to make sure. And then, on the Labor Day thing, my recollection is our past practice has been to use the day, the actual holiday itself, as the target rather than the number of days. And I think we were pretty consistent in that for the several years where we were within striking distance of being able to get there, which is something it's been not the case for the last few years, which is why it hasn't really been an issue. So that's my recollection as well. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Cameron?
Thank you, John. Cameron Black, Washington State Guide Association, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Guide Committee. And two things just real quick, within the first basically preliminary modeling on these sports seasons. One is, I think someone previously mentioned talking about simplification of the rules within that long view, that tongue point to warrior, going to the 10th versus going to a mark select after September 8th. Being the optimist that I am, and being the run that we're kind of looking at too, if there's any possibilities of increased bag limits or extended seasons, by kind of simplifying the rules and just only allowing that to be set till the 10th right now, and then allowing anglers, just because of the we're gonna have a lot of flexibilities in the seasons as far as where these guys can go. We're not in a situation where we're going to be closing complete sections down to basically good viable fishing, should be able to go downriver, catch coho, be able to go just slightly upriver, catch that. So if we go to the 10th in Longview, and then fortunately that 10th date is late enough in the run where we could definitely see some, maybe see some real positive passage over Bonneville, and maybe able to keep that section open kind of after the fact, but then jumping from mark select and then maybe jumping back to non-mark select could be confusing. So sometimes simplifying that I think would be beneficial. My second comment would be the mark select switching down in buoy 10. In 2014-15, correct me if I'm wrong, on the big Chinook year, we had we had a monster Chinook run on our hands, and we allowed, like I said, I could be a little bit off on some dates, but just to my recollection, we had a season set down at buoy 10 that I thought was supposed to go to the 28th or the 30th, but we kind of blew out our lower river impacts way too fast, and we ended up losing, if I remember, 6 to 8 days down in the buoy 10 section before those fish started really showing themselves above Bonneville. Then of course it went wide open up above. If I remember, 2 and 3 fish Chinook limits in some sections above there, but we kind of missed the boat in that early August fishery because we didn't have a mark select fishery. And so I think if we switch that, it could, if we basically go non-mark select first and then to select, we kind of risk anything, we don't want those closures and those restrictions to bump up the river, especially with the forecast that we have. Also, we've got, a million early fish, a million early coho heading to the mouth of the Columbia for the August 1 opener. So there should be some real good viable fishery there. And that's all my comments I had. And if, like I said, if you could correct me if I'm wrong on that 2015, I just wouldn't want to see those restrictions. We don't want to miss out on this one too, especially after last year. So, and thank you, staff and everybody, for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Yeah, that is one of the risks if LRH is not updated in season, so the denominator in the impact calculation pretty much stays the same unless some ocean fish are rolled in. So if you burn them up too early, there's not much chance of getting bailed out like Upriver Brights can do with a run upgrade. So Steve, Watrous, I think you either have another comment or you still have your hand up. I saw Harry Barber pop up here. Let's go to Harry. Maybe I did not. I thought I saw Harry. Harry, are you on mute?
I'm off mute. There we go. Harry Barber, Recreational Advisor. I support the base model as it spreads out opportunity and harvest. I think you've done a great job. I recognize there may be a little tweak here or there before it's finalized, but I think you've done a wonderful job. I'd like to make a couple comments on summer Chinook. I'm looking at the escapement numbers for the last 10 years, and I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but summer Chinook have missed their escapement targets in 8 out of the last 10 years, and some years missed it by a whole bunch. 2019, it was probably the worst year with 4,600 escaped, and the goal is 17,000. So that is it's a downward trend from 2016, 16,000, 13,000, 7,000, 4,600. Now, I haven't seen any escape numbers for 2020 yet. If you have those, I guess we'd be interested in seeing what those are. The other caution here is it's a robust forecast for summers this year because of the fact that one's been unescaped. We just have to be sticking with mark selective. But I've mentioned before the harvest of summer Chinook off Alaska, BC coast, west coast Vancouver Island is very, very significant, sometimes 30+%. So hopefully this forecast of a robust run of 70-some-odd-thousand is not just an impact, the impact of very little fishing occurring up there in 2020, and that could occur again this year. So I think that forecast may be low. Time will tell. But if it is low and you get a big run, as you know, it's awfully difficult to try to play catch up. So hopefully we can get an assessment. I think around, you said July 1st for summer Chinook forecast update. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Harry. Just a time check. We're coming up on close to an hour in our breakout, I think, which was about what we had scheduled, but we also had the meeting go until 1, so I think we have a little flex time unless staff has some other thoughts. I do see Greg King in the queue. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, John, I'm kind of like Steve Longtress, wanting to know what those mark rates on those summer Chinook are. That fishery doesn't get a lot of participation because guys are letting go fish that they would like to take home. Not ESA listed fish. They're getting by us. It's a great recreational opportunity. The sun's out. Have we ever looked at having a non-mark selective fishery in that? Quota type fishery starting June 16th, maybe running to July 4th, something like that. We ever modeled anything like that, John? Just my comments there, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Just taking some notes. Yeah, we have the ability to model that, but we have, if you go non-mark select, you will have a shorter season, and then other issues that others have pointed out. We just generally been in a mark select approach here lately. So we could model it out though, but nice to see it. Okay, I'll make a note. Okay, well, let's see. Do I see anybody else? I'm not sure I see any. Oh, is there Robert Moxley? Did I see a hand?
Yeah, I want to throw in a few more comments, John. As far as the summer Chinook, you know how I've rolled on that for years, and where I stand, I don't see why we couldn't have some non-select opportunity if that mark rate's low and the runs, looking healthy. I pay into this fishery and would like to think that maybe that gives me an opportunity to retain, some fish when warranted. And yeah, in the summer Chinook, kind of a dead horse. I get it, but nonetheless, it would be nice. It would be nice. As far as the fall fishery models, I agree with what staff has proposed. I'm not a mark select fan at all. My constituents do not like it, but with what we have to work with, the first 15 days, that just comes out as pragmatic. So, I would support that model at this point. And then as far as the Coho, the mark rate, figuratively, if that Coho mark rate's at, say, 50%, like it was, in years past, which I assume it to be, we're going to be going through a lot of Chinook trying to get our Coho. If it's, a 2-fish bag and somebody wants to get that mark Coho or they're just wanting Coho, they're going to be releasing Chinook, and that's going to add up, I think, in regards to release mortalities and could bite us. We'll see. Furthermore, this fall, as the season progresses, in the past, the commercial industry, which I have no problem with whatsoever, and everybody here knows that, or should know that, they've had the opportunity to keep unmarked Coho. And I brought this up time and time again in these compact meetings, that, if you're going to allow the commercial industry to keep unmarked Coho and say zone 4 and 5, why not give the sports the same opportunity? I've heard the arguments, they don't catch much. We're not expecting that fishery to have much of an impact. Well, neither would the rec fishery in those zones. So I'm just looking for some equality and opportunity when it comes to, Coho. if that mark rate is what it has been, it's going to be a lot of floaters. And so be nice if we could have maybe one per year, and we pitch it as a, terminally wounded, not going to make it. And I'm sure there'll be people that'll take advantage of it. But if we put it out there and use it as an opportunity for conservation, I would be in support of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Let's see. Got a few hands up, and we are kind of running out of time a little bit. So, Jesse?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I don't want to take this off on a complete other tangent here. I would also be interested in seeing, what a model would look like where we could get some non-mark select for the summer Chinook as well. Maybe not the entire quota, but maybe a portion of it or something like that. I think that would help generate some increased anglers on that fishery. And then also, listening to what Robert said, I think that there is kind of a little bit of a point to worth listening to on possibly considering if we even can allowing some coho retention as far as non-mark select on that as well. Just even if it's one a year, that just helps. In reality, that's probably not going to do a lot to that impact. It's going to help get some people off the river more timely manner. So anyways, I don't want to run that off on a big tangent, but I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, just, we get the logic on the one mortally wounded coho, but it is a challenge because it'll come across as a bag limit that includes one unmarked coho, which most every boat in buoy 10 will handle or find one of those. So the impacts would change dramatically probably in a fishery like that. So something to consider. Boy, their hands are coming now. I must have said something. Let's see who was first. Randy Woolsey.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm here. So someone asked about the mark rate on Chinook, and I don't recall seeing in the materials about the mark rate on these coho that are coming back this fall. I seem to recall in another meeting discussion that the mark rate was really high, which might lead into this conversation. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, there's occasionally some comments about the business aspect of fishing in Oregon and Washington, and being an advisory group member and a member of the Northwest Sport Fishing Industry Association, we certainly care about the resource and conservation and all those things, but also have a lot of employees and jobs, whether it be in the fishing tackle business or the boat business or all the other things that surround, this industry, a lot of meaningful jobs. And we're just very happy to see some opportunity this year, especially given the way it's been in recent years and the COVID situation and all that. So I just wanted to mention that this is everyone should realize, I guess, that this is a rare opportunity. And I view this coho situation this fall as an integral part of opportunity for anglers in the river. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I think we're getting down where we only got time for a few more questions. In general, we'll sort through what was brought up here and try and bring back some of that prior to or at the next North Falcon meeting. Little fast paced to hit everything on the fly right here now, but let's see, David Moskowitz.
Hi, John. Thanks again. Dave Moskowitz with Conservation Angler, and I think that the conversation that's just gone on is really important, and I definitely appreciate hearing the concern anglers have for when they're encountering a fish they got to release, and the mortality associated with that. It's definitely a troubling element of this kind of trying to make this management work. But I'd like to harken us back to what Harry Barber mentioned about the summer Chinook not meeting escapement goals, and I think that's got to be a warning sign for everyone. Yeah, they're not ESA listed. That's really not that's necessarily not necessarily the issue. They're not meeting escapement goals, so you're starting down a tricky path, and having a non-mark select fishery on that is it seems unwise at this point. I'd like to point out that some of the issues about the marking we're facing are coming from the fact that there's more and more releases in upriver from upriver hatcheries that are unmarked, and one of the purposes is to get some of those fish back to tribal hatcheries, for instance, and it just shows the complication that management has, because not only are you probably releasing hatchery fish down in the lower river fisheries, but then when those unmarked fish get up into their home waters or near their hatcheries, they're also a problem for determining the PHOS numbers. So, this is a growing problem, having more and more fish released that are unmarked, and I think that it's got to be for anglers who are handling these fish. That visible mark, is an essential part of management, and I think this really highlights a concern for trying to be consistent, trying to protect wild origin fish. And I think it's just important to keep in mind that the ultimate goal is to make sure enough of these fish make it back to their natal waters. And that's not happening for summer Chinook. I appreciate the opportunity to speak again. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think we're getting down to, a point where unless, if it's really important, we can still squeeze it in. Otherwise, always feel free to send us any thoughts that might come to mind after the meeting to one of the staff, and we'll try and get it in the hopper for the next meeting. I still see hands up for Jesse, Robert Moxley, David. I assume those were all just covered. They're all gone now. So unless I'm missing somebody, we may have finally covered most everything. So I'd like to turn it over to other staff. Is there any comments in the last 10 minutes here that you'd like to get out there?
Hey, John, this is Quentin.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I have heard discussions as far as what being able to keep unmarked coho down at buoy 10, and I know that the ocean's doing a lot of gymnastics to avoid the queets coho, so there's some issues with the queets. So I don't know the exact details, but I know that if we were to do that, it would increase our impact on the queets, which know that they're giving up a lot in the ocean to avoid those fish. So I'm not sure how that would play out. I'm hoping to find out more, but that would that would be a major factor in considering that. Just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Q. Any other staff comments in our closing minutes here? Well, hearing none, let's see. I think we could almost call it a wrap. Remember, we're not going to get back together like we used to do. We're just going to conclude this meeting, and then our next meeting is scheduled for April 1, Columbia River North Falcon 2. We intend to try and get additional meeting materials out for that, and any updated models available out prior to the meeting. And if you have any other questions or anything, then just forward those in the interim. So with that, I think we can go ahead and conclude our recreational breakout. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John and staff.